itself, with the moment it's going to how you're going to also have this is also going to incentivize the government itself to provide assistance, right? On how you're going to provide them with lawyer for them to be able to create a consensus agreement that is going to be beneficial for both sides of the house. On how this is also going to create an incentive coming from the society itself to create a discussion regarding what exactly should be written on the premarital agreements and what kind of agreements are going to be beneficial for both sides of the house, right? Under of the house, we are going to say that this kind of premarital agreements is going to be mandatory because at the end of the day, this is going to cater to the interest of the government itself regarding on how you are going to you're supposed to understand what you're trying to get into before you're trying to engage with the relationship itself. And second off, regarding on how we're also going to be protecting the most vulnerable actor under this debate today, right? I'm going to move on to my arguments then. First, on the principle of why this is actually justified for the government to be done, right? First thing first, let's actually characterize what is actually the interest of the government, right? You need to understand that the government have always done things to ensure that you have all of the knowledge that you need to ensure for you have to ensure that you are going to make the most rational decision and whatsoever it is. It comes in the form of how within job you have you need to sign a contract with your companies and whatsoever it is to ensure that employees understand truly regarding what they're going to get into, what they're going to get the benefits and whatsoever it is. This is the same principle that is going to exist under the house, right? Because you need to understand that this kind of marriage or this kind of a relationship is going to be something that's going to affect all of the years regarding your life, whether or not you're going to be able to go out with your friends and whatsoever it is. This is something that's really fundamental towards your life because it's going to you're going to be sticking with them towards your life and whatsoever it is, and it's also always going to have some sort of emotional burden towards you. Therefore, it is really really important for you to emphasize this kind of point, right? Why is it then important for you to have understand what you're trying to get into, right? Because you need to understand that a lot of information needs to be you need to have a lot of information to be able to create a more rational decision, right? Because you need to understand on what is actually the risk and benefit itself, which is not going to be apparent under the of the house the moment that you're going to not make it this as a mandatory itself, because there's no current situation regarding on how it's going to be something that's necessary for you to be done and whatsoever it is. Why is it then necessary, right? Because first, there's a possibility of this relationship not going on your side itself, right? On how you're not going to be able to maximize your happiness because you don't really understand what is actually you're trying to get into. On how later on in the worst case scenario where you're going to break up or you're going to divorce and whatsoever it is, and or your parent or your significant other is abusing and whatsoever it is, it's going to be the burden of the government to ensure that you're going to be protected and whatsoever it is. And we believe that this is a preventive action for you to be able to remove or prevent every single harm that is going to exist under your side of the house, right? Second thing on the principle regarding on how it's going to empower the most vulnerable actor, right? You need to understand that in the current status quo right now, government needs to have some sort of basis and legal basis in order for them to be able to empower certain individuals, right? This is really necessary, right? Because vulnerable actors in the current status quo right now are not going to have any other options because they don't have any foundation to build up their case and whatsoever it is. And this is going to be the most this is going to help the government to be able to empower the others because out of it they already have a stronger basis and whatsoever it is. Therefore, the principle that I've brought to you have already justified why the government is allowed to do this and why is it necessary for government to do this itself, right? Moving on to my second argument then, regarding on how we're going to be able to incentivize a productive discussion regarding what the future will actually look like, right? You need to understand what is the current discussion in the status quo actually looks like, right? First, on the idea of how love relationship and marriage and whatsoever it is are most likely going to be dependent and heavily reliant on love, right? It comes in the form of how people have a strong narrative saying that love is enough, love should be unconditional and whatsoever it is, right? This is going to be very problematic, right? Because individuals that want to have premarital agreements are most likely going to be stigmatized as someone who is materialistic and whatsoever it is. That is going to prevent them from accessing this kind of premarital agreements itself, right? Second of all, regarding on how this discussion is not for everyone, right? Most likely premarital agreements are only accessible are only done by people within a privilege itself who have more money and whatsoever it is, because there's an incentive regarding on how they need to protect their money and whatsoever it is. And meanwhile, people in the lower class society are not justified to do this because they have nothing to protect and whatsoever it is. That is the narrative that is existing in the current score now, right? You need to understand that this kind of rich people is not the most vulnerable actor. What is the most vulnerable actor? It's regarding on how this low class society that have no other alternative if they already devote their life towards a certain individuals, but the moment that they're going to have some problems, they're going to mess up and they're going to not going to have any alternative itself, right? Lastly, on the idea of how the moment that in the current status quo right now, government cannot intervene much, right? Because this is always seen as a private matter that should be discussed within between significant others and between your husband and wife and whatever it is. It comes in the form of how this is also burying the government itself to have a tangible action for them to be able to do something out of it, right? Lastly, on the idea of how there's no guarantee guarantee that people will suddenly hear you and whatsoever it is under the of the house, right? Because there is no agreement that is written. You can the people that are going to have more power can just say that, oh, this is something this or this is not something that we agreed with and whatsoever it is, and they can just go away with it, right? What is the problem with this, right? We need to understand that love is actually not enough, right? Because your love can change and whatsoever it is, and it is going to be very dynamic and whatsoever it is, right? You need to understand that it's kind of like a discussion regarding on what kind of wage and what kind of benefits you're going to get towards your significant others is extremely important, right? Because you need money in order for you to survive. You need money for you to be able to eat and whatsoever it is. And also regarding the concern or regarding the child itself, right? Because if you don't discuss this kind of like this kind of like child or whatsoever it is, it's most likely that this kind of like discussion is going to be neglected as it's not something that's already exists in the current status quo right now, right? Then the question comes to how will the discussion looks like under of the house? Because first we're going to like incentivize these kind of like individuals to have discussion beforehand, right? On how whether or not they are this kind of like individuals that I'm going to marry into is someone who is capable to actually fulfill my needs and whatsoever it is. Because there's going to be a full-fledged transparency, unlike the side of the house where people are most likely going to conceal themselves to make themselves look better and whatsoever it is. This is extremely important, right? Because the moment that you already know what is exactly what relationship you're going to get into, it's the moment that you're going to have more fulfillment because you already understand these individuals are going to fulfill your interest and whatsoever it is. Second, we are also going to remove the stigmatization regarding on how these premarital agreements are only done for those individuals who are going to like be materialistic and whatsoever it is. When in reality, these kind of like individuals you want to have like some sort of like premarital agreements because this is their last self-defense in order for them to be able to defend themselves towards externalities that of how their significant others might be changing and whatsoever it is. Right? Lastly, on the idea of how we're also going to provide more protection to the vulnerable itself, right? Because under of the house, this is going to be something that's going to be governmental matter because under of that there's already an agreement that's binded by law or whatever it is. This is going to give like foundation for the government to directly intervene to if like a certain problem is going to access under of the house. Very proud to propose.
Why do you think prenup is good? Check, memorable. Taking engagement from closing opposition, only engagement. Going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Marriage is like a glass of milk, right? The moment you spill those kind of things, basically in ourselves, the house, with this kind of prenup agreement, we are giving the chance for you to basically clean this kind of messed up, and about how you could basically put the milk inside this kind of glass again and drink it up, right? In yourself, the house, basically the spill will get into a big of problem, right? Basically, you are going to spend about how, for example, you sacrifice your children's future, you sacrifice your family's good name, about how at the end of the day, with the cases coming from the opening opposition, sure, there will be a way to basically fix this kind of problem, that those kinds of solution coming from the mouth of leader of opposition is also from this kind of prenup. Therefore, even if the leader of opposition concede, this is his saying, right? Talking about how because it basically provides people with more alternative. Basically, why is the reason we should basically skip this kind of good stuff alone for this kind of privileged and smart people that have been educated, right? This is basically the case that opening government stands for, right? Basically about how at the end of the day, every people with their kind of social classes at the end of the day, where there are a possibility where people should never know about how the possibility of this kind of premarital agreement could actually exist at the end of the day. Therefore, with the obligation coming from the society, from this kind of government, the moment we are going to make it mandatory towards this kind of society, that also means the government have to give a certain level of education, therefore giving this kind of things towards an understanding towards the society. Therefore, even if the most underprivileged people in the status quo exist in the case of leader of opposition doesn't know about the existence of this kind of very important stuff at the end of the day, in ours of the house, this kind of education about how the discussion, etc., will increase and it would create betterment under the side of the house. And this came from the words of leader of opposition talking about how alternative only exists in the case of opening government. But now, let's basically engage towards all of the cases coming from the leader of opposition, right? Leader of opposition basically brought 2 cases, right? First of all, talking about how people will be incentivized to basically stay in a toxic relationship. Second of all, about how power gap is going to very heavily exist in our side of the house, right? 2 engagement towards each particle, right? First of all, you need to understand the reason why people stay in the toxic relationship is not actually an exclusive harm in our side of the house. People will always stay in the toxic relationship. There are a lot of parameters, right? Talking, for example, about how if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're afraid. Later on, you will be about how you will be separated with your children. Talking about how you're afraid there is no more income the moment you're separated from your abusive husband in the future. In your side of the house, you never basically give a guarantee, but how the moment this kind of condition actually exists, that's how you are going to create a betterment at the end of the day, right? In your side of the house, exactly but how the toxic relationship will still stay, because basically there is no way for this kind of people, for example, an abusive husband will basically give away his money towards this kind of their wife, or even give, like, for example, child support for this kind of children in the future. In our side of the house, how it's going to look like through this kind of premarital agreement, we are going to discuss about how does the issues that is going to happen and about how the exit mechanism from both sides, that is husband and wife, is therefore incentivizing, but how the moment a discussion of about how the problem actually exists in this kind of relationship in the future after they are married, it's going to be solved up. About how you are going to be in a preemptive measure, talking about how the possibility of problem is going to exist in the future. Therefore, in our side of the house, people that is going to be married in the future are going to be more futuristic, talking about how all the kind of things are going to be fixed. In your side of the house, people are only going to remember that marriage is so happy about how finally you could have legal sex with your wife, etc. But in your side of the house, you never actually communicate about what the moment of problem actually exists, how you are going to solve all those kind of problems. You're only hoping about how at the end of the day, the moment this kind of problem coming from both parents actually exists, you will solve it the most righteous way, right? But that is the case coming from opposition, right? They are depending on whether or not the husband and wife is going to be a good actor in this debate about how they are going to solve every problem with the communication. In our side of the house, we doesn't care. Even if they are a bad actor, the moment we have this kind of premarital agreement, that's how the moment exit mechanism actually clears up about how the condition to basically solve up, right? But not only talking about that, right? The moment this is also engaging towards the power gap that they assume is going to exist in our side of the house, right? Power gap is even going to exist bigger in the opposition side of the house. Basically, power gap exists because people doesn't understand the law in marriage, right? Therefore, the people who can afford better lawyer at the end of the day, they could actually, basically, if I marry Angie and I have a very good lawyer, I could just basically left her away and gave her no money at the end of the day, right? This is exactly what will happen in the case of opposition side of the house. Exactly because about how, for example, a working husband and a stay-at-home mom, she doesn't have any money. She is so vulnerable at the end of the day, she doesn't have the option to basically hire up this kind of lawyer, but her husband do. What is going to lead, right? This leads to about how the emotional connection coming from this kind of mother and children is going to be separated away because the father having a very expensive lawyer is going to get all of the benefit coming from this kind of things. In our side of the house, we are basically giving this kind of power towards underprivileged people at the end of the day, where they doesn't have to commit for this kind of very expensive lawyer at the end of the day. Why so? Because we basically make it clear up in the mechanism talking about how we are going to make a premarital agreement from the beginning. Therefore, the existence of very expensive lawyer is unneeded in our side of the house. People could just basically solve their problem away. That's how in our side of the house, we answer off the problem coming from the opposition of the house when we say about how problem will exist even bigger in their side of the house. Any engagement CO. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's continue, right? Basically, I'm going to enhance Angie's argument, right? If Angie's talking about how this is kind of morality, protection towards minority, etc., when in doubt, goes to economy, right? I'm going to basically instant to you about how there is economical benefit that is going to happen towards whether they are rich or they are poor at the end of the day. Read the context slide, right? The moment that this kind of context slide actually also tells to you that debts are also going to be settled in this kind of premarital agreements, two things that will happen, right? The most common trickery issue in the marriage is debt trap. The moment, for example, I have a debt, Angie is rich, I marry her, she is forced to basically pay for my debt at the end of the day. Through this kind of premarital agreement, one thing exclusively that will come from the opening government about how transparency is going to be forced to this kind of people or this kind of villain at the end of the day. We are forcing people to actually tell the truth to their partners about what is happening because basically you are told by the law, you are told by how you are mandated to do this kind of things. Therefore, there is an incentive for people to basically do good and about how they are not trying to harm the other partner. In the government oppositions of the house, truth will also still exist, but it depends on whether or not this kind of partners that are going to into marriage is really wanted to tell the whole truth, right? We say with a lot of cases about people telling the lie towards their partner, it's very unlikely in their side of the house, people are trying to fix this problem. But second of all, talking about this kind of debt, right? We are saying in our side of the house, money is very important, right? That's why exactly in our side of the house, there are separation of treasury in our side of the house within husband and wife. Therefore, the moment, for example, this kind of husband gets into a debt, this wife is not going to get trapped into it. Therefore, she could be released from this kind of problem. In the opposition side of the house, exactly the fall down of a husband is also the fallen down of this other kind of wives and the end of the family. Proud to propose.
Okay, am I clear? All right, thank you. Opening government, we agreed not everyone can get into marriage knowing what they're getting into. But even in their best case, to protect everyone because they believe that in a status quo that isn't enough security yet, we say that the society in all ultimately in many conservative countries as well, there's already existing check and balances that the society will punish you when you violated your spouse, when you violated your child, when you cheat and when you're neglecting your child. At the end of the day, OG only argues in a world where these premarital agreements are made with the rational mind, that these prenups are made exactly equal and justified for both, and this is why we believe that this is not the case. Not everyone is capable into making these prenups as good as it sounds, and we'll prove this, the whole of this, under my speech. Why exactly this premarital agreement should not be mandatory? Not everyone is suitable for this. This is the first case. To some people, emotion is enough, because the way some people see marriage, and you cannot dismiss this, is entirely dependent, let's say, on love, on comfortability, on the sense of belonging. My first speaker has mentioned to you about genuinity, and in which we have to prove to be important. I'll explain this in my extension, right? Because people see marriage in many countries later as something very sacral, very important, and thus having an idea of such contract, over such important thing, over something that you look up to all your life, principally doesn't align with their beliefs. You basically betray their whole perception over one such big thing over their life. And that means you are expecting something bad to happen. This is where the lack of trust kind of contradicts the whole idea of marriage within so many people. And we prefer to let all of these sorts of people have the agency to choose whether or not to have one, and make agreements along the way like it is in a status quo. That is up to them. Secondly, not all people have the prerequisite knowledge to make sure that they can build such perfect agreements. This is where the link backs towards how I say OG is never exclusive. Government has no mechanism on how they can protect people from being deceived, or because marriage is something very personal and very versatile. This will link back towards my third point. Not everyone has the same power in getting a say in making these prenups, right? Because when one party is more powerful, either in a higher social hierarchy, better economically, better, the richer, they have more power in the sense of the beginning. A lot of people getting married, being cross-social and cross-economically stands. You have to acknowledge that there are so many people getting married because they're desperate, because the society forced them to get married, because their friends, their family told them to do so. You can go on.
Basically, if you are hoping in the very happily marriage, then you don't need to be afraid for the prenup, right? If you are afraid for the prenup, then you are up to something wrong.
People are not afraid of prenup. If you want to have prenup, then have it. If people don't want to, okay, we have no right to say this, because marriage is something very personal and very versatile. Everyone has their own right into determining what kind of marriage that they want. Either is it, the way that they believe the one it is, the one how they want to protect their marriage later on. We say let it be happen towards individuals. Everyone has the right to do it. Moving on towards the linking back, right? You have to acknowledge that so many people are getting married because their family told them so, society told them so, or maybe they're in a place where they do need to get married. Maybe they're late in age, not being generalizing and all, but some people are feel the push like getting married because let's say the society creates this whole image that when you reach the age of 30, let's say for a woman, then you have to get married. And so, or either you are in a very low economical position, let's say, not that this is exclusive thing, but this is what happens a lot in the status quo, and we have to acknowledge this. And so they have no choice but to get married. This is where the deceivement came in. Why is this such an active form that the government cannot defend? When prenup exists, and it is mandatory to everyone, right? Due to the manipulation that could happen, linking back towards my second and third point, people cannot opt out of marriage when it is forced. People get cheated, getting their child neglected. When you already sign these agreements that could limit your agencies when things go bad, because notice you inherently made this when you also desperately don't want to lose your soon-to-be spouse, right? Because the harm of government side is insatiable and much confining in its nature. Another preemptives, if later government wants to argue about inheritance, alimony, and such, all this is justifiably exists in the status quo. We can still protect this. Even if you don't have the resource to book the good lawyer, let's say, if you're, you don't have a job, let's say like you're a stay-at-home mom, and then you want to opt out of this marriage, and then you're afraid that maybe your husband won't provide you with the correct amount of money, like to secure your life later, because that is the justified and that is the right of one's spouse. you already have help with many social organizations like protecting women and children in the first place in the status quo. So many free lawyers that is, specialized in such case. When you want to go to court, there is a lot of options that the government or private sections can, help you within it. We support the betterment of the check and balances towards this whole thing rather than forcing the uncomfortability to some. If you want to leave the prenup, then go, but if not, then cool. Another weighing here is that the most likely, when it comes to court over inheritance in battle, let's say if government later wants to bring up about stepmother or stepfather battling with the kids of one, when someone, like if your dad died and then whether the inheritance will go towards your stepmother or other to you, we say that in the status quo nuclear relationship is already most likely to win. There is not much harm onto it. We don't have to force such great prenup, the way that the government are trying to impose and saying that they will protect everyone. I'll say we're protecting the most vulnerable people in our side of the house. Very proud to oppose.
Check. Just give me a second, please. The opening government picture this world when it's mandatory for people who wants to get married and will be, they have to pick and premarital agreements at the end of the day will benefit the government and also the vulnerable actors at the end of the day. I think that it is already very, very clear why then the delta on government is actually tangible, but then they never really explain why then the process of the divorce and how it will harm the couples deeply and how then it will destroy in the marriage at the end of the day. I think that CG will explain that very gladly. But first, let's see the case of the opening opposition. The opening opposition say that, okay, supporting there has been already supporting institutions that are actually taking care of this matter, then people will be, there will be an existence of manipulation when it comes to the government that will handle these premarital agreements at the end of the day. I think that it is unlikely for it to happen because there will be law that will take care of it, right? So in order for people to actually, in order for the actors to actually has this discussion or already has this decision for them to actually make a premarital agreements, then they will have the safety net at the end of the day and will not has to be worried about what kind of evil people that are going to manipulate this at the end of the day. We see that these premarital agreements is just another case of birth certificate, for example. I don't see why then the people under the opposition side of the house will have to be suffered just because they have to sign in for like a certificate, for example. I think that why it is actually beneficial under our side of the house due to the fact that people only has to create an agreement and they submit it to the government. As it is that, then why then people would be benefited at the end of the day? Because we noticed that the fact then now it is become a legal matter. When you're actually counter a certain problem inside of your marriage, when you're actually counter a certain problem with your spouse, for example, and then at the end of the day, you will ended up unfortunately getting a divorce. And then government can process it with the written evidence that the investigation would run smoothly. I think that the opening government say that, okay, the divorce will still happen under their side of the house and also will still exist under our side of the house, but then the process of the divorce never really been touched by the opening government. I think that what the opposition doesn't understand is that the divorce process will be run easily comparatively in the status quo if you have these premarital agreements due to the fact that there has been a written evidence in order for people to actually follow, in order for the judge to actually put away on. I think then how then the process of divorce is really torturing and tiring process and it needs to be avoided at the end of the day. First, you need the money to buy lawyers, to pay for your lawyer, sorry, and then when the premarital agreement actually exist, then you don't have to use this, you don't have to buy your lawyer as much as anymore. Because due to the fact that in the status quo, if you don't have a premarital agreement, if you do not have that, then therefore there is going to be a lot of discussion. You notice that inside of this status quo, there are going to be a long discussion about who will get what and which inheritance that people would actually ended up with. I think that even if the opposition is trying to say, oh, it's okay that people don't have to pay a lot of, don't have to use a lot of money in order for them to actually get a decent lawyer, for example, because it is being provided by the government. But I think that not everyone has the access actually to it, right? What then will exist under your side of the house is that you will only left this couple will actually, this vulnerable actor would actually more in depth, for example, at the end of the day, right? You spend more time in court and has to face the person that actually hurts you, which will deter your mentality at the end of the day, right? Notice that inside of the divorce, you have to, there has to be something wrong in order for you to actually file up for divorce, for example. Probably they are going to have like cheating, for example, or God forbid, an abusive spouse, for example. I think that why then the divorce is actually really literally torture for people is that they have to then face these people that actually hurts them inside of the court again and again and again, and they have to live inside of the circles because there has been no safety, there has been no decision making at the end of the day because there is no existence of premarital agreements. Not everyone is suitable. Not everyone is suitable to do premarital agreements, said the OO, but then actually should, they actually just didn't have to have a basic, they don't have to has professional knowledge about it, right? It's just as simply as dividing inheritance, for example. I think that why then the opposition doesn't actually, could not actually win under the government side of the house is due to the fact that they're pointing out there's a difference in power dynamics, okay, of the couple that will exist, and people will likely has the difference power making in dynamics, right? Due to the fact that there are actually differences in order for them to actually gain their money. For example, if someone that are actually a housewife, for example, it is actually justifiable for them to not actually have the bigger decision making due to the fact that actually at the end of the day, the husband that actually provided them, provide the needs of the people inside of the house. Yeah.
If things like inheritance already exist within our side of the house, why subject people to unnecessary risk under your side by having prenup mandatory?
Okay, I think I will explain that later, but things about inheritance, right? I think that why then inheritance is actually important under our side of the house, under every side of the house, but then never really addressed by the opposition side of the house, and why it will be worsened under their side of the house. I think that when it comes to a scenario where people are actually getting into divorcement and there is no premarital agreement at the end of the day, and people will avoid divorce court, for example. I think what will exist is that the parents will then jump into the discussion, because there is a condition where parents will interrupt or participate in decision making in the family, because they notice that especially in the conservative country, for example, or a conservative community, they will have this, oh, this parent will actually know better in order for us to actually give a better way. But there is a difference in between the interest of the parents itself that will hamper the decision making at the end of the day, right? Parents will, of course, they're going to be biased, and therefore they're not going to be best decision making at the end of the day. The moment where parents actually participate in this situation, it will destroy the actual relationship. It will destroy the freedom of this spouse that exists at the end of the day, right? The scenario that will happen under opposition side of the house is that they will only cater into a small group of people, even if they are saying that, okay, people can still choose whether or not they want to make premarital agreement, for example, or not. But I think that at the end of the day, people who doesn't actually do this as a mandatory ways will suffer most likely. Whether it's people in the lower socioeconomic or people who actually have inheritance at the end of the day. What you will get under the government side of the house is that people are going to be avoided a long and unnecessary process of divorce. Therefore, they are going to have a better agency at the end of the day under our side of the house. So proud to propose.
General pronouns he, him, POI. Please just stand up. No need to say a POI because it's going to interrupt. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, CEO will come in this debate by bringing a nuance in this debate regarding and discussing about the principality of love and principality of the marriage couple, in which we think it's not clearly addressed by all of the rest of the benches in this debate, right? Meaning that all of the principle and also the practical will be covered by the closing opposition itself in order to all of the arguments regarding the practicality coming from the opposing opposition will fall into the closing opposition, since we're talking about the principality which becoming the prerequisite of the practicality that being brought by the opening opposition itself, right? So we'll just see what the government benches came in this debate, right? The panelists, but government plays in the very best case scenario in which that the perfect print-up would be established under the rest of the house, because the government itself, they would provide an assistance toward the setup and also the establishment of the print-up itself. We say no. We say no, right? Because, and also the government itself, they're trying to be dismissive that certain factor could affect the establishment of the preliminary agreement itself. That's happened also to the closing government, in which we think we also argue how then the unfair establishment of the print-up would be exist under our side of the house itself, right? OO came in this debate talking about how then it is unlikely that a fair print-up would be established. We favor them in this idea. However, we do acknowledge that the perfect print-up might be exist. However, we argue that how then it is still bad, even for the couple who loves each other and happily in the marriage status itself, right? What CEO brings debate will bring you a nuance regarding the principle of the married couple itself, and also we're going to address and also characterize more about the contract relation, about what makes then the preliminary agreements is unnecessary in this debate, right? So, but several response before actually jump into the CEO's cases, right? So, firstly, from the government, they're trying to rebutting and also flip the idea of the divorce itself. They're trying to say that, oh, the divorce will be worse under our side of the house. We refuse that premise, because first, in the status quo, there is pengadilan agama, for instances, that will provide and assist a consultation phase for each couple, for instances, who request a divorce in itself. That is enough, because in some cases, there are some couple who wish to divorce or request a divorce. They just need some consultation, or they just need to discuss this kind of thing to fix things up with their partner itself. That is something that won't be exist under the side of the house. Why is that so? Because at the end of the day, this kind of couple who wish to or requesting a divorce, they will just opt out from the relationship through the assistance of the preliminary agreements itself. Because through these preliminary agreements, they try to expect each couple, each individual, each partner to be perfect, to make no single mistake itself. That is something that wouldn't be exist under outside the house. We're going to tolerate any mistakes coming from your partner itself. However, under the rest of the house, it's not going to be tolerated in itself, because at the end of the day, they're just opt-in into preliminary arguments. Hence, we say the divorcement is going to be harmful under the rest of the house. But secondly, how then the unfair spring up wouldn't unlikely to happen? Right? We think that in the very social conservative countries like Indonesia, for instance, the moment these couples come into marriage, right, the parents are the one who are very dominating, or the one who very affected this kind of premarital agreements itself. This kind of parents, they're the one who want to enforce, and also they want to insert their own interest. For example, the parents were socially economically more stable. They want to protect their own resources, their own capital, for instances. Meaning that this kind of people are the one who try to dominate the establishment of the preliminary agreements, and they have the tendency to actually like hire a lawyer to actually make this kind of agreement to be in favor of the children itself, in which I think it will be very harmful towards the less resources people, right? So two things that will closing opposition will bring in this debate. Firstly, about the principle of the married couple, but secondly, we're going to engage to the best case and worst case scenario itself. Firstly, we're talking about the principle of the married couple itself, right? All benches being too practical regarding how then it would create a betterment in terms of practical, for instance, the divorce assistance, child support, equal distribution of wealth, establishment of premarital agreements, and yada yada yada. However, CO will bring a new nuance in this debate by bringing up an issue regarding the principle of married couple. Why it is important? Because first, principle is the prerequisite and foundation of all arguments coming from all benches. Secondly, because through discussing the principle of love, the married couple itself, we could better explore whether or not the premarital agreement is needed or not. Let's talking about the principle of the marriage. the principle of the married couple, in fact, is built through love and commitment, right? The reasons why an engaged partner or two individuals want to opt in into marital status is due to affection and love they feel toward the partner itself, not to mention the commitment that they want to preserve during their time together. Whenever there are conflict, there are two options. First, stay and fix things up, but second, opt out. We will address why those options are worse through the existence of the parental agreement itself. Right? Marital first, because the marital status should be developed internally, right? We think that through this parental agreement, for instances, the marital status would be driven by external forces through the existence of premarital agreements. There will be no such kind of commitment, for instance, the essence of trusting your partner, because at the end of the day, you're afraid that your partner will leave you eventually, hence you will hide behind this idea of premarital agreements. You're going to stay, for example, if you are the one who hurt, if you're the one who experiences something negative from your marital status, for instance, you just prefer just to opt in and also just to stay in the relationship because you know through these parental agreements you're the one who get to blame it itself. You know that these parental agreements wouldn't be in favor of you anymore itself, because there is something that in the parental agreements that would make you become very harmful and become one of the vulnerable actors in the debate. That's what we don't want to pursue in this debate, right? But secondly, if we're talking about how then the people that want to divorce themselves, we think that through these premarital agreements, everything is going to be very harmful, right? Because through this premarital agreement, for instance, people are driven, especially because you want to make it mandatory, people are driven to fix everything up through the law, through the legal basis itself. We think that is not how the marital status and also how the law should work in itself, right? Because we think that when you make this kind of premarital agreements become mandatory itself, you want people, and also you send narrative to the society that you have to fix things up through the legal basis. You have to involve law, for instance, to make things up. That's not how we think that the principle of the married couple should be right. But even if we think that even if we take the bullet and play in the best case scenario of the opening government by saying that, oh, they are the couple who are educated, for example, they are the couple who are very lovable to each other, we say that through these premarital agreements that is still bad, because firstly the happiness itself is very fluctuative itself. There is a social dynamics and also the social forces, external forces that could affect and also that change that kind of position and also situations that happening and also faced by this kind of couple itself, in which we think the opt-out is an option towards them, right? Meaning that through these premarital agreements, they're just going to limit it, and also they're going to diminish the option for them to also opt out in itself, because at the end of the day, even though they're happy, we never know in the 5 years, next 10 years, they want to opt out of the relationship due to the external forces and stuff. Because we are the one who talk about the principle of the premarital agreements itself, please vote for the closing opposition. Thank you.
Cek. Second, ya. We think that we all understand what's the principle of love, what's the principle of marriage and the divorce itself, right? Knowing that the reason why then you are going to be married, the first, that's the love and affection, just like what the opposition side of Tawa explained to you, as well as the married by accident, right? It's a must for you to have the kind of status of marriage to have your kind of justification of why then you are going to have these children with this kind of father, for instance, right? They need to live together. It's kind of different when they're going to have to live alone, pay rent alone. They need to merge that all along the way. When marriage, when you need to kind of merge your life and so on and so forth, the finance, food, space, etc. You need to make that in one line, right? But the status quo is marriage is not that easy, and it's not that wonderful and butterfly and rainbows itself. The intervention of their parents, like the grandmas of the children, will still be there. For instance, like the victims of this kind of case is the wife itself, for instance. The wife then need to stay there in order to have these parents to be able to provide more, because the husband okay, I'm gonna give up to have these children to live along, to stay alive. No, right? They need to stay with that as they don't have any work, for instance. Now, let's talk about the affair. They're going to be still quiet of the affair to feed their children, right? And also the other problems they can lead to the living victims with no right as the right that will be dependent on their mates, like, right? So if their mates die, for instance, like, or just like gone like that, so you don't have your right of the marriage itself. Right? The first thing first, we need to have the divorce, of course. Process is not like just like leaving your house and imagining your wife can do things as like you guys in the silent treatment or arguing, for instance. Like even some communities needs to have their document to the other countries first, like a Vatican, for instance, in order to have the kind of divorce process, right? Therefore, at first they do have their vows. They don't expecting to have the divorce by the very first place, right? And to being a single parent forever. However, that's not that beautiful and butterflies. When you lose the interest, when you have something that you important, like LDR, for instance, political position, or maybe even death, all alternatives will only hamper the right of the victims by their parents. For instance, like what kind of other alternative then we're going to have? That's never explained by the OO here. That is, for instance, like even if we have the parents, okay, even if we have the community, we say that it's not okay, as well as the narrative that I will be explained after this. Now, they will think like, okay, because my son is die as the husband, the one that he used to marry you, that's the wealth for your marriage, is mine again. The wife will suffer as that's the only money that they have. Let's go first to the CO first. Now, with the principle and practical, we all know that no one that already been in the marriage things, they don't want to be divorced, right? Here with the principle and the practical, we all know it together, like pengadilan agama is not enough when you only need the justice to get out from the abusive parents of this kind of husband, as well as the husband itself, to still have your children fed, for instance. The domination things that we say that it's okay, that because they are the one who work for that. You don't have the like kind of particular things. That's the problem, that even if we have to say that domination is okay because they are the one who search for that. Now you need to deal with the particular things to measure. What will you give as the victims, for instance, and what will you have as a perpetrator, for instance, right? Here we don't think that the happiness really stands here as like what kind of happiness, like forgiving your husband as cheating, and of course they will like kind of flip your divorce statement first to be like, okay, we are going to go back again to the marriage at the very first place. No, they will not be like that. Right? Coming to the first of the OO here, the child supportive community and the heritage, we think that it's not okay, as well as the narrative is not enough. Just like for stopping the people for have to, for instance, like narrative, oh, if you cheat, then you will go to hell, for instance. It will not enough, like for them to leave their family if your parties ask you to change your religions and to leave your family. Right? That's something that they cannot have, that your family is more important than that, right? The alternative here will be the multiple choices. Also, like we don't think that the parents should be interfered here, as it is not the only thing that they should have. The vulnerable people that don't have the other community, that's your vulnerable people. After this, please. Not only that, they do stuck in the wrong community to ask you to have your own struggle at patriarchy conservative, for instance. Now, let's go with the check and balances. Won't work here, even for normal condition. For instance, like this kind of wife, they're helping the siblings of the husbands to go pursue their life, to go pursue to the higher education. Then after that, when the wife kind of like leave out this kind of husband, therefore they're not going to have, okay, I need the support to the society to have this kind of, I need this justice. They will state it that we think that it's okay because she has already give you money as well as your family. Therefore, it's just okay just move on and deal with that. Dealing with the power due to the arbitrary areas onto what on one specific individual should have without this preemptive, like this premarital things. Yes, please.
Notice that at the end of the day, under your side of the house, your arguments will be existing within a vacuum in which the parents will not necessarily have any control over their children, while at the status quo, they will always have the powers because of the power symmetry.
Of course, about the powers of the grandparents itself, you cannot just deny that. Okay, at the end of the day, we will just kind of leave this kind of me as a parent, for instance, my son and then his girlfriend will be married, and I'm not gonna like intervene and step into that. No, you cannot just expect that. They will have, for instance, like parents that have the different religion, for instance, they will teach that kind of the religion to these kind of children that's as a vulnerable actor here, that they don't know what to do, they don't know what to like to follow, for instance. With the principle of MOU of working, we think that it's a different thing with opening government, as we are having more than that. With the characterization of the government and then to empower the actors to be included, we think that this kind of things that should be discussed of the premarital action should not have the vulnerable actor, that they don't have the agency. They do have the agency, they do have the parents, but that's the only thing that they will have. Right here, we don't say that you are going to have the alternative regardless of the circumstances. Under this narrative is not enough, and arbitrary rules dividing the right, because it's like kind of blurry at the first place. Here we have the safety net before bad things happen, and your kind of mitigation things would happen after the bad things happen. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, gender pronouns he, him, POI, just stand up and raise your hand. No need to scream POI. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand that the existence of premarital agreement came from the history of aristocrats and royalties who seeks to protect their wealth and estates once they get married. This is the we do believe that at its essence, premarital agreement was designed to protect the rich, and that is why we believe that both government benches are too focusing on their best case scenarios when they talk about how this will protect the vulnerable actors. We believe that that is not really relevant at all. Now, before moving on, let's review what has happened in today's debate, starting off with the case that has been delivered by opening government, talking about how they're making this mandatory because they want to protect the most vulnerable actors, which is the low class society. And they talk about how love is not enough and etc. We believe that this is not the case because the fact that premarital agreement is designed to protect the rich, ensuring that their assets are not taken away. And so we believe that when you contextualize this into the middle and low income families, premarital agreement don't really have much effective, especially right from the start. You don't really have many things to offer to your spouses in the first place, right? And so this strongly burdens both sides of the houses, both partners, especially when they are middle to low income at the very first place. Now, we believe that one of our main arguments that clashes directly with the premise of the government benches talks about the toxic marriage. We believe that in our side of the house, we would like to say that premarital agreement actually prolongs toxic marriage. Why? We believe that sure, this exists in the status quo, but at least that in the status quo, people have less fear because they don't need to face legal repercussions when they do have the courage to opt out. Especially in today's world, when you have feminism and etc., women are strongly encouraged to opt out of toxic relationships, toxic marriages. On their side of the house, women will be more fearful because of the premarital agreement. Especially when we have kids, when we're talking about married couples who have kids, when they're just staying for the kids, in our side of the house, at least when you have the bravery to opt out, you don't need to fear regarding the legal repercussions. So you have a more likelihood of opting out because the existence of legal repercussions does not exist. And the second way to tackle this, because this was also the case that was brought by Closing Government, we believe that because when they talk about Closing Government also talked about like abusive husbands and etc. We believe that this does not logically stand because we believe that logically prenup are supposed to prevent this type of thing from happening, right? Abusive husband and etc. So we believe that when abusive husbands do happen, that means that the cheating spouse or abusive spouse already knows that the prenup is not fair. Therefore, this spouse doesn't care that they're cheating or they're being abusive because they know that they won't face any repercussions from the prenup because they already know that the prenup is more advantageous to their side. Next, moving on, we believe, still moving on the case from the government benches, talking about, talking about the protecting the vulnerable actors. And most of their cases are similar, talking about cheating, right? We believe that this premise of premarital agreement preventing cheating, it relies on the prerequisite of that person getting caught, right? And so we believe that on their side of the house, it's going to be more dangerous. Why? Because spouses will learn to cheat better and cheat more sneakily because we believe that when cheating person will always cheat, and even with premarital agreements, that will just incentivize them to cheat better and to not get known by their partner. This is very harmful because, like as in Indonesia right now, the STD rate on housewives is very high because of cheating husbands, and their wives doesn't know that the husbands are cheating on them. We acknowledge cheating happens on our side of the house, but at least on our side, people don't have a motivation to cheat better. People don't have a motivation to be more exploitative. No, thank you. Moving on. Next up, let's talk about what CG brought into today's debate, right? CG talked about how one of their main issues actually talks about parents, in which we will agree parents of the spouses are very important actors. We believe that in marriage, it's not just about the couple, but also the parents. We believe that parents have their own agenda and can potentially be disastrous when you transcribe that into a legal proceeding, especially because prenup primarily talks about money, and so parents will protect their family's money, not actually their child's best interest. And so this correlates to what the whip brought from Closing Government, talking about marriage by accident. Thank you for that. When they talk about marriage by accident, which is not based on love, but based on norms, we believe that the premarital agreement will be even more unfair. Why? Because the parents of the girl is going to be very vengeful towards the guy because that guy got their little girl pregnant, right? So the premarital agreement that is going to be set up won't be inherently fair because it is being from a foundation of revenge because it is a marriage that is based on accident, right? And when they talked about abusive husband, it's still the same logic. If it's supposed to prevent abusive and cheating husband, if it happens anyway, that means that the cheating or abusive part knows that the premarital agreement and everything else is unfair. That is why they're not scared to do that anyway. Moving on to what closing opposition brings into today's debate. So we believe that first, premarital agreement is when you make it mandatory, it is very harmful to the couple. Let's take a look at the best case of government benches, right? When they both come on equal footing, enter the marriage happy, and remain happy. Why is this harmful? My first member has pointed to you that happiness is very fluctuative. There's no married couple who doesn't face any challenges, doesn't face any problems throughout their marriage. In government side of the house, when couples go through this, there's going to be no more second chances. No one will go through marriage counseling because of the premarital agreement. On our side of the house, there's still chances for married couples to fix up their marriage. On their side of the house, the marriage will instantly get broken, right? Let's take a look at our worst case. When, for example, we acknowledge that in our worst case, we have examples of maybe gold diggers who go into the marriage just going after the money, right? Why is this still better than their side of the house? We believe that logically, during the divorce, the rich can just hire a good lawyer and actually prevent their money from being taken away in the first place. It is barbaric to force your your married spouse, even if they're only after your money, to make them face legal repercussions. And then this violates the fundamental idea of what it is to be married. Out of all of those reasons, that is why we strongly oppose. Thank you.
Oh,